Hello, welcome back. In case you're new, my name is Steve. This is my racing game devlog. We're on number 36. So I'm building a racing game with Unity. I've gotten the comment a bunch of times. I am going to finish this game. I do have some kind of idea what I'm doing. I've played with Unity for about 8 years, and I planned this project for a very long time before I started it. Maybe that'll help curb some of the comments where they say, I hope you finish this game so it doesn't end up in the Unity graveyard like everybody else's. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, this video is about an open world traffic pooling system, and the goal was to create a pooling system on top of the existing traffic system framework that I've created. So all of this I've wrote from scratch, and I'm basically at the point where cars would drive around this massive road network, and I had up to 400 of them in the scene, but that brought my CPU usage way up, and the player can't see most of those cars. So the thought process is put a pooling system as an additional layer on top of this so that I can reduce the CPU overhead. The first idea was to create an active zone around the player. All of these zones that I'm going to talk about, I still need to test them, and I want to make them dynamic. So in the active zone, that's a zone where the pooling system will take no action. The traffic will just drive normally. Currently, I have that zone set to about 300 meters. Beyond the active zone is the spawn zone. This is an additional 400 meters outside of the active zone. So now we're up to 700 meters away from the player. So between 300 meters and 700 meters, that's where AI traffic is allowed to spawn. Traffic will only spawn if the spawn point is not visible and if the trigger area is empty. Beyond the spawn zone is the disabled zone. Any vehicle in the disabled zone will become disabled. This only happens if the vehicle is not visible by the player. Let me just jump into play mode so we can visualize this a little bit. Now we can see as the player moves, the spawn zone changes and the active zone changes. What I'd like to do moving forward is have these zones adjust dynamically based on some additional rules. And that will help me make sure that there's always a set amount of vehicles within the active zone. Okay, so now we can jump into spawn logic. Let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit more in the scene view. And for spawn logic, what I did was I created a traffic spawn point prefab. I have it selected in the editor so we could see the inspector. What I've done is I've created a traffic trigger layer, and this object has a box collider and a mesh render. Once the scene starts, the material is swapped to be a transparent material. That way the object is actually invisible, but it's still being rendered by the camera. And with that, I can use the on became visible and on became invisible callback, so I could determine if that spawn point is visible by the player. If it's visible by the player, I'm not going to spawn a vehicle there. The box collider uses triggers, so on trigger enter, on trigger exit, and on trigger stay. Those are all used to determine if there's a vehicle in the trigger area. If there's a vehicle in the trigger area, we're not going to spawn a vehicle there. And that's basically it. That's how the spawn system works. So in order to lay these spawn points out throughout the road network, I created a simple helper tool. So I'll just pop that open. I called it the spawn points window. And basically what I do with this is I just press the load route button, and that gives me all of the routes in the scene. And with those routes, each of the waypoints gets a button above it. So I'm zoomed out a little. Let me unload the routes and reload the routes. And now we can basically see an S above each route. And I could probably make this look a little better, but it was just for me to spawn some spawn points and just get them into the scene without having to dig around. But basically how it works is I just click these buttons, and that spawn point prefab will be placed on the route. And that's about it. So now let's jump into the build and see what the build actually looks like and how performance changed. Okay, so we have a build. Graphics quality is ultra, screen resolution 1920 by 1080. and we're sitting at about 100 frames a second. So if you were following along in the previous builds, we were at 100, but once we finished laying out the entire traffic system, we dipped down to about 50, 60, and now we're sitting over 100. Let's just go ahead and drive around. I'm pretty happy about the performance of the build. I do think that I need to adjust the spawn point and the active zone dynamically to actually really get the feel of traffic in just the right spot. I'll play with it a little bit more and I'll think about it, think about what kinds of rules I want to put in place, and then I'll do something. I don't imagine that will take anywhere near as much work as it took to set up the pooling in the first place, which I think took me about 2 or 3 days. So it's just going to be a little bit of tweaking of some of the settings dynamically just to make sure that vehicles are where we want them to be. And really just putting some additional rules on top of the system. So at this point, it feels really good. I have traffic around just about everywhere, which is awesome. The density is not as high as I'd like it to be around the player, which is why I think I need the active zone adjusted. But actually, at the same time, you don't need to have a ton of cars in the scene. The purpose is just to help bring the scene to life and give the player some obstacles to avoid that are in the road that will be positioned randomly, basically. Nonetheless, I will still like to improve the traffic simulation and make sure there's more vehicles. So after this, the next step is basically to start working on some of the content creation. And this is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. I need to upgrade my Substance Painter license. I tried it out a few years ago, and I'm basically planning on purchasing a pack of vehicles from the asset store and using Substance Painter to customize them. And that's how I'll make my hero vehicles, which is the player and the opponent racers. So each of them will have a custom and unique car design, and at least that's my plan for now. We'll see. I'm actually really looking forward to doing some art stuff instead of just programming. I feel like this can still be optimized a bit more, but at this point I'm really happy that I'm driving around in the high 80s and 90s, up to 100 frames at some point. I feel like this is something I could build up from at this point, and yeah, I'm just ready to start. So thanks for checking out this series, and let me know what you think about this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.